the Gulf states present a target-rich environment. It's easy to use those drones and those short-range ballistic missiles to do great damage to all of the countries in the Gulf, including Saudi Arabia. The Iranians also have a lot of long-range missiles and also long-range drones that can hit Israel. Now, they've not done much of that up to now. It's very important to understand that in the 12-day war last June, the Iranians fought almost exclusively against Israel. They did not target American military bases in the region, and they did not target the Gulf states. In this war, they're targeting Israel, American military installations in the region, and the Gulf states. And in the first part of the war, up to pretty much now, they've concentrated mainly on attacking American installations and attacking the Gulf states. But they have announced that they are now beginning to switch the focus, and they're going to concentrate much more on attacking Israel. And they have the long-range ballistic missiles, and they have drones, which they can use to hit Israel. And the problem that the Israelis face, and of course this is a problem that the Americans face, is that we only have a finite number of defensive missiles that can be used to shoot down those incoming ballistic missiles. And even when we use those defensive missiles, they oftentimes don't hit the incoming Iranian ballistic missile. So we have this situation in the Gulf and in Israel where the Iranians have the capability to pound all of those countries for a long period of time. And there's nothing we can do about it. And in fact, as time goes by, our ability to shoot down those missiles, shoot down the drones, decreases. It doesn't flatline, and it certainly doesn't increase. It decreases. So the Iranians have a serious set of military options against us. And what this means, Chris, is that as we walk up the escalation ladder, and that's what we're likely to do if we can't find an off-ramp, and I don't think we're going to find an off-ramp. If we don't find an off-ramp, I think what we'll do is march up the escalation ladder. And of course, Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump will say we have escalation dominance as you go up that escalation ladder. But I don't think that's true. I think the Iranians have powerful cards to play, and therefore we are in a really terrible situation.
What does that escalation ladder look like? What will that mean? They're already carrying out virtually saturation bombing of Tehran.
Not yet. They're pounding Iran. There's no question about that. And they're pounding Tehran. But they have not killed more than 1,500 people. I mean, it's terribly regrettable that they've even killed one person, much less 1,500 or whatever the number is. But they have not gone that far. The Israelis and the Americans have not gone that far up the escalation ladder. And in a very important way, there's evidence that the Americans are discouraging the Israelis for going too far and too fast up the escalation ladder, because we understand that the Iranians have a second strike capability. The Israelis don't care that much, because the Israelis want to see us get deeply involved in this war and destroy Iran. They'd like us to level every city in Iran, break the country apart. But Trump does not, at this point, want to go down that road. But I think what happens here, Chris, as we march up the escalation ladder, is that we target civilian areas. We end up killing larger and larger numbers of people. And furthermore, we begin to flirt with the idea of tearing apart Iran's petroleum infrastructure and maybe their desalination plants as well. We begin to really try to throttle the regime, to strangle it. And again, this involves not just simply killing people, which I think if you get desperate enough, you'll do. The Israelis, of course, would have no problem doing that. And ultimately, I think if we got desperate enough, we would not either. But again, the problem is we do those things, the the Iranians will retaliate. If we go after energy infrastructure in Iran, the Iranians will go after more and more energy infrastructure in the Gulf, in Gulf states. If we go after desalination plants, they'll go after desalination plants in places like Saudi Arabia and Israel itself. I think the Israelis have 4 or 5 big desalination plants that they depend heavily on. And I think the Iranians will be incentivized to take them out if we or the Israelis or both of us go after their desalination plants. So you can see that as we go up the escalation ladder, the Iranians will go up with us. And I don't see how you can make the case that we have escalation dominance in any meaningful way, especially when you take into account the fact that the historical record is quite clear here that countries can suffer enormous amounts of punishment in these sorts of air campaigns, and the population does not rise up against the government and overthrow it. And in fact, what happens in most of those cases, if not all those cases, is that the population rallies around the flag. So if we think, or the Israelis think, that killing Iranian civilians is going to put pressure on the government to quit the war, I think that is erroneous thinking.
Well, we tried that in Vietnam.
We tried it in Korea. If you ever look at what we did to North Korea during the Korean War, it's horrific. It's much worse than what we did in Vietnam. And then you go back to World War I, World War II. Excuse me, not World War I, World War II in Europe and World War II in East Asia against Japan. I mean, the number of people that we killed is just hard to believe. But it's very hard, if not impossible, to get, those air campaigns to cause a government to quit.
Well, is there an example of an air campaign that does break a government? I don't think so, historically, is there?
No, I think the only case you could make is the dropping 2 nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and August 9th got the Japanese to finally quit. The Japanese were at the edge of the cliff by August of 1945. And the question is what pushed them off the cliff? And some people would argue it was the 2 nuclear weapons on those 2 dates. I actually think that's not true. I think it was when the Russians came in on August 8th. Remember, the war in Europe is won on May 8th, 1945. And at Yalta, the Russians or the Soviets had said that they would come in 3 months after the war in Europe ended. In other words, they would come into the war against Japan 3 months after the war in Europe ended. And the war in Europe ends on May 8th, 1945. And 3 months later, on August 8th, 1945, the Soviets invade against the Japanese Kwantung Army in Manchuria and quickly overrun it. I believe that it's the Soviet decision to attack Japan on August 8th, which is in between the 2 bombs on August 6th and August 9th, that is the critical factor that gets the Japanese to throw up their hands. But that's the only case you can make where one could say that air power helped a bit to end the war. But just quickly, Chris, on that case, because it's important to understand it, we start firebombing Japan on the evening of March 10th, 11th, 1945. And the first night that we firebomb Tokyo, this is March 10th, we kill more Japanese than are killed at either Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Just think about that. That's the first night we firebomb Tokyo. And then we're working our way down the list of large Japanese cities and firebombing them, murdering huge numbers of people. Just truly remarkable. And the Japanese don't quit. They don't quit until August. And that, of course, is when the 2 nuclear weapons are dropped and the Soviets come into the war. And that's sort of the coup de grace. But firebombing just didn't work. And it supports the basic point that I'm making, that you can murder. And this is really murder because you're purposely targeting civilians. You can murder huge numbers of civilians and it doesn't work. The historical record is remarkably clear on this. And here we are in Iran. We're not going to send ground forces in, right? We're going to rely on air power. We're going to bomb, and we're going to bomb Iran and win the war. We're going to create regime change without sending ground forces in. Just going to do it through the air. The historical record makes it unequivocally clear that this is almost impossible to do. Absent a miracle, and I don't believe in miracles, it's hard to get regime change, or impossible to get regime change using air power alone. You got to send boots. You got to put boots on the ground. This is what we did in Iraq. We had to invade Iraq to get regime change. And if you want regime change in Iran, you're going to have to invade that country. And that's not going to happen. Country is much too big. There are too many people. And furthermore, we've been there before. It doesn't work very well. And even Donald Trump is smart enough to know that sending an army into Iran would be a real prescription for disaster. President Trump approached the Pakistanis, and he pushed the Pakistanis to work hard to get this ceasefire. It's the Americans who wanted the ceasefire, and the Americans wanted the ceasefire because they understand that they're losing the war, and they have no winning strategy. I mean, what's very important to understand here is that if we escalate the war, Iran will counter-escalate. And as you go up the escalation ladder, it is not clear that the United States can prevail. In fact, it's clear to me that Iran prevails as you go up the escalation ladder. So what President Trump was looking for was an off-ramp. And the only off-ramp that he can find is one where he essentially concedes defeat and says that we will negotiate on Iran's terms, and it has to be the case that Iran will get a lot of what it wants, and Iran will end up better off after this war than Iran was before the war.
Let's break this down, John Mearsheimer, because I'm going to read out Donald Trump's post on Truth Social. He says, United States will work closely with Iran, which we have determined has gone through what will be a very productive regime change. So the first thing he's claiming is that the actions of the last 40 days have resulted in a regime change. There will be no enrichment of uranium, and the United States will working with Iran, dig up and remove all of the deeply buried B-2 bombers' nuclear dust. It is now and has been under very exacting satellite surveillance. Nothing has been touched from the date of attack. We are and will be taking tariff and sanctions relief with Iran. Many of the 15 points have already been agreed to. So he's suggesting that some of the big military objectives have been met. Regime change, enrichment is off the table, and therefore the United States has won this.
Well, let me make 3 points. First of all, there has not been regime change. The regime is in place, and the regime is more hardline than ever because the Revolutionary Guards have greater influence on what's going on. And the chances of toppling the regime are smaller than they ever have been. So his claim about regime change is false. Second, the point about nuclear enrichment, the Iranians have made it absolutely clear from the very beginning that nuclear enrichment is not off the table. And if you look at their 10-point plan, nuclear enrichment will continue. So President Trump is not going to get Iran to give up nuclear enrichment. And then third, you want to note that he talks about the 15-point plan here. Last night in his Truth Social post, he talked about the 10-point plan. The 10-point plan is the Iranian plan. The 15-point plan, which he's referring to in this latest post that you read, is the U.S. plan. There is no way that negotiations are going to go anywhere based on the 15-point plan. The only hope here is to negotiate on the 10-point plan. And this is a sleight of hand on his part to convince people in the United States and in Israel that the 15-point plan still matters. But the fact is, the 15-point plan is unacceptable to the Iranians, and the Iranians are in the driver's seat here. The Iranians were winning this war, and it was President Trump who wanted to end this war because he understands full well that it will have catastrophic consequences if it goes on, not only for the United States and his presidency, but for the wider world, to include India.
So let me ask you, let's get this straight. There's been no regime change, and Iran's nuclear program remains more or less intact. So then, what exactly did Donald Trump achieve these last 40 days?
He lost the war. That's his great achievement. And the Israelis lost the war. We went to war with a set of objectives. We were going to do away with Iran's nuclear enrichment capability. We were going to do away with their missiles. We were going to make it impossible for Iran to support Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. And we were going to produce regime change. Those were the big four goals that we had. We failed on every one of those goals. Furthermore, we now have a situation that didn't exist before February 28th, where the Iranians control the Strait of Hormuz and have tremendous leverage over the international economy. Again, that didn't exist before the war. First of all, it's clear, both in President Trump's initial social post and in this one that you read, that Iran is going to get sanctions relief. There were serious sanctions on Iran before February 28th. Now we're talking about taking them off. Furthermore, the Iranians are demanding U.S. military bases be moved out of the region. They don't want U.S. military forces near their borders. And if you look at what's happened during the war, we have 13 bases in the region, and those 13 bases have either been seriously damaged or destroyed. We have naval forces in the region that can't even come close to the Iranian coastline for fear those naval forces will be shrunk. What's happened here is that, in effect, Iran has established deterrence vis-a-vis the United States. The United States is not going to want to pick another fight with Iran, given what's happened over the past 40 days.
But Professor Mearsheimer, let me play devil's advocate. The Iranian regime is very badly off. It's lost a huge number of its leaders, both political and military. So there's a lot of attenuation of basically very important experience there, number one. Number two, their weapon facilities have been hit. Their nuclear facilities, if you were to believe Trump and some of the material that we're reading, buried under the ground with no access. Iran doesn't have any access. And also, of course, there has been a huge pulverizing effect on infrastructure. So Iran is really railing against the ropes, isn't it?
No, I think that's much too strong a statement. There's no question that Iran has suffered damage. Nobody would deny that. Right. But the Iranians continue to fire missiles at Israel and the Gulf states and American military bases in the region. They still have their enriched nuclear material, and they clearly still have the ability to enrich uranium. They continue to support Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas, and the regime is firmly intact. Yes, the regime is wounded, but that is not the same as regime change or a decisive defeat for the regime. And if you think about how well Iran can recover in the years ahead, first of all, you're going to get sanctions relief of some sort, and then the Iranians control the Strait of Hormuz, and they're going to treat it as a toll booth, as every